Let's get that analysis. Guillaume Lavoier joins us, Associate Member, Raoul-Dandurand Chair in Strategic and Diplomatic Studies at the Université du Québec in Montreal. Thank you, sir, for being with us. I'm wondering what your interpretation is of what we've just seen. We're waiting for Carney to do a news conference to give us a broader briefing on what went on. But we saw there two men who clearly have two different ideas about where their countries are going.
Oh, of course, and great to be with you, first of all. And Mr. Prime Minister Carney has given us I would say, a masterful demonstration of self-control for all the falsehoods and perhaps even baiting of President Trump on Canada becoming a U.S. state. Perhaps his reference to the real estate was clearly designed for Mr. Trump to understand. But over that, what becomes more and more apparent on that very idea is that President Trump is only talking to himself. That idea is only his. Certainly no one in Canada responds to it or follows that idea. And clearly there is no constituency in the United States for this idea. So perhaps President Trump, by keeping on this narrative about the 51st state, is more and more demonstrating that on at least that very issue is just one man alone.
Indeed, one wonders a little bit about Trump's mental acuity when he talks in this way, but I won't get you to analyse that. It might be unfair to ask that of you, Guillaume. But what I can ask you about is the strategy behind this, because, you know, Trump has levied tariffs on almost everybody, including Canada. And in some way, you know, if you look at what commerce is like between the two countries and what things are made, what things are exported from the United States, there are very often Canadian components and Canadian work that goes into that. So in many ways, partnership seems to be the way ahead. However, Trump perhaps isn't reading that script.
No, and this is perhaps, there are very few ideas that have been consistent with President Trump over the decades. One that's been consistent in his worldview is that in trade, there are only winners and losers. There cannot be a beneficial mutual relationship. Another idea that he has is that if money leaves the United States, that somehow is bad. You know, if you go to your grocery store and you give money to the grocer, unless you're not leaving with some goods, that's a subsidy. Canada is not being subsidized by the United States in any way, shape, or form. Actually, even if Canada is only 10% of the US population, if you take out energy, which Canadians supply greatly in the United States, Canada buys more from the United States than the other way around. It's very important to underscore this, and I believe Prime Minister Carney knows this very well. The president is not a king, and power in the United States is far more diffused or multiply sourced than in Canada, in the UK, or in France. The Senate is a key ally. The governors are key allies. So are our clients. Canada is the #1 client for American goods. So yes, Prime Minister Carney is talking to the president, but a lot of those discussions in Washington are with others who share perhaps more greatly Canada's point of view.
Indeed. You feel in some way Carney could become, I'll just throw this out there and see what you say, the Trump whisperer, because Trump likes people who've achieved things, and certainly Mark Carney, if you look at what he's achieved on the global scale, it's massive. Obviously, talk about being chairman of the Canadian Central Bank, the Bank of England in London. I mean, if you boil it down to community level, I mean, Carney's involved with a community project at a Premier League football club in the city of Liverpool. For instance, Everton FC, the team he supports. He's a man who's involved in many different projects that make an impact, that make a difference. Might that somehow make Trump wake up and say, hang on, this man has a point. Let's listen to what he says.
Well, obviously, there's a discussion in front of the cameras and in a discussion with closed doors, this idea that Canada is being subsidized. Mark Carney won this election on the very premise that he was best equipped to deal with Trump than his opponent. And he won a very big mandate on that, even though he has a minority government on the idea of how Canada should deal with the US, there's great Canadian national unity on this. And Mark Carney has a tremendous international network. So, and not being Justin Trudeau, that opens possibilities. But again, uh, Mr. Trump is peddling a number of ideas that are completely disconnected from reality or the truth. So it's very important to not trying to respond to every single idea put out there, but make the argument with those who will really pressure the White House. And in the end, it's not for Mark Carney to convince Donald Trump. It's for Mark Carney and Canada to convince our partners in the US to pressure Trump into backing down, not because it's in Canada's best interest, but because it is in the economic and welfare interest of the American people themselves.
Guillaume, it's quite right what you're saying, because clearly there are things that Trump says in a very brazen way, which often are totally inaccurate. But these issues you're talking about, the pressure that Carney can put onto Trump, is there something in particular that you have in mind when you say that?
Well, Canada is not without to speak the Trump language. We have a certain number of cards in our deck. Canada now sends to the United States oil below market price. Canada is an energy superpower. Oil, gas, uranium, electricity. If there's electricity in New York, it's because it comes from Quebec. So we're a major provider of this. Counter tariffs is always a tool we can use. And in the end, making things cheaper is Trump's number one goal for the American people and the American voters who voted for him. So in the end, we're key for making American way of life cheaper. And it's very important for Mark Carney not to rush to make a deal, because as many more people are sort of getting notice of this, time may not be Mr. Trump's best friend here. Pressure is mounting, even though the economics numbers are not terrible right now. It's not because you have a sunny day in October that winter is not coming. Eventually, the laws of physics will apply. And if you put on tariffs, if you make trade more difficult, that will result in inflation and perhaps even product shortages. So in the end, and of all the things that Canada sends to the US that are essential to the US economy, you can add potash, which is the number one fertilizer for the agri sector. And we're 90% of all the potash in the US come from Canada. So we're not without cards. And it's very important to distinguish between the rhetoric of Trump in public and what might happen in private, but even more so to understand that though he is the US president, he's not the sole decision maker in that regard.
Interesting. And Guillaume, many people wiser than me say that putting tariffs on anybody is actually counterproductive. It could lead to more economic hardship for you. In some way, to use footballing parlance, will these tariffs turn out to be an own goal for Trump? Will that be something that Carney will be reinforcing, do you think, as an idea?
Oh yes, for sure, and it will be painful. There's no doubt about it. And Canadians might have to put counter tariffs in place, but wall-to-wall counter tariffs would be self-defeating. The idea is to target products such as bourbon, not because alcohol is not good or that bourbon is not delicious, but because it's made in Kentucky, a very Republican state, or Harley Davidson, made in Milwaukee, who voted for Trump. Every product has a social political surrounding that needs to be put in place. And that's where counter tariffs that are very nip and tuck, very strategic in their deployment, will be part of a greater strategy.
Guillaume Lavoier, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with us here on France 24. We really appreciate it. Guillaume Lavoier, just to remind you all watching wherever you are in the world, Associate Member at the Raoul-Dandurand Chair in Strategic and Diplomatic Studies at the Université du Québec in Montreal. Thank you very much indeed, Guillaume, for joining us. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure.